This is episode 68 of the 1% podcast, and on today's show, Dylan Slattery and I discuss how masculine identity is changing in subtle ways. There's a new generation of men out there that are discovering freedom from vulnerability. And so in today's episode, Dylan and I discuss his stage 4 melanoma diagnosis, mental health, addiction, toxic positivity, and how storytelling is such a wonderful gift. Let's jump into the episode.
You have cancer. 3 words that change a life forever. We would like to offer another 3 words. Be an overcomer. Welcome to the 1% podcast, where our conversations with other cancer warriors, survivors, and caregivers allows us to give you that extra boost you need to face your challenge head on, live life from a new perspective, and forge a path that keeps you moving free and clear. Now, welcome your host and cancer survivor, Truett Taylor.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to today's episode. This is episode 68. Happy to be back with you guys. Today's episode is all about men. So all the females out there listening to the show today, go grab your man. Make sure he's in front of whatever device you're listening on. And this episode is going to be about the guys. So there's an article I read recently in Psychology Today, and it talks about the 3 keys to emotional vulnerability. Basically, the type of relationships men can have if they show a little more vulnerability. And what's great about the article is it really discusses like 3 key ways we can become better relationships and how vulnerability represents the core element in any long-term healthy relationship. It was love at first, sudden, intimate self-disclosure, said no man ever. But the ability to expose ourselves to another and trust our partners, that our partners will still accept and trust and, enjoy the unfiltered version of ourselves is pretty challenging for guys. So let's jump into 3 keys to emotional vulnerability. The first thing is resist lying to yourself. Resist lying to yourself. The allure is clear. Having a life partner who travels through life's triumphs and pitfalls with us enriches our lives and grows in tandem with our hopes and dreams is a natural desire, regardless of how masculine we are as men. Yet the ability to self-assess readiness for romantic relationships escapes some men. Maybe this is a meaningless distinction for some because who is ever ready for a real relationship? I'll tell you who, somebody who's healthy. Part of being healthy is taking time to understand ourselves and the intentions that motivate our actions. Intentionally in relationships, it is an intangible ingredient that helps healthy people find other healthy people. In a study from Finkel and colleagues, they reviewed relationship science, which is a common principle that emerged to relationship maintenance mechanisms or practices people intact to sustain relationships. Specifically, relationship commitment represented one of the strongest predictors for employing healthy relationship maintenance mechanisms. Partners who perceived the relationship as better than others ignored or even thought negatively of romantic alternatives. Those who sacrificed for the relationship generally had higher relationship commitment. In short, they intentionally cultivated greater relationships, greater commitment through these actions. So, first one is resist lying to yourself. Second one, practice communicating ambivalent feelings. That's practice communicating ambivalent feelings. Say what you mean and mean what you say. It's an unwritten creed of manhood, implying that the lack of definitiveness in words or actions reflects a little less masculinity. While having the integrity to stand behind our words is welcome, the process by which we reach decisions in relationships is not always clear-cut. A range of emotions can arise in response to issues inside and outside the relationship and prompt us to fall back to our subconscious beliefs. Man, that happens so often. So for some men, this may mean reaching a decision about how we think or how we feel about an issue independently before communicating our thought process to our partners, thus preventing the couple from reaching a shared decision. Several relationship theories refer to internal working models or subconscious beliefs about ourselves and others that guide how we show up in relationships, such as the attachment theory, which provides one of the most robust theoretical perspectives of how these internal working models develop, starting from our first relationship with our parents. Having a caring and safe upbringing fosters secure attachment and makes it easier for an individual to feel safe and expose vulnerability. For those who develop a secure attachment, negative internal working models may lead to anxious or avoidant behavior when in close relationships, because the expectation is that either love is not deserved or love will not be given. While the latter isn't the case for most men, considering internal working models that shape how a man thinks about himself in a relationship and the utility he sees in communicating his feelings to his partner may provide insight into increasing emotional openness in relationships. Pretty interesting. And the last key is going to be appreciate the power of independence. Appreciate the power of independence. In a relationship, is a relationship simply the sum of its parts? Anyone who has been in love will guarantee a relationship is more simply adding the qualities of two people together. The research generally supports this conclusion. In a recent study, Finkel and colleagues identified uniqueness as a foundational principle of relationship science because unique relationship patterns emerge when partners' qualities intersect. Creating a meaningful relationship beyond simply the combined qualities of two individuals involves a balance of independence and resilience from each partner. So hopefully you guys picked up a couple of things from today. 3 keys to emotional vulnerability. I know as a man, that's something I talk about a lot because I was raised completely different. Very tough father, very, very little emotion showed. And it's one of those things I've really tried to learn from as I've gotten older. And in all the relationships that I've had, it took burning through a few relationships, friendships, even relationships with my parents, siblings, intimate relationships that I've had to really help me dial in to be a little more vulnerable, to say what I'm feeling, to not worry about being exposed to my real self. Because in a relationship, eventually, the longer you're with someone, who you really are is going to come out. And so why not go ahead and expose that from the very beginning? Feel safe doing that. And if the person accepts you, great. If they don't, there's somebody else out there that will. So definitely learned that the hard way over the years, but I'd like to say that I've nailed it pretty good now with my wife. So, man, it took some time though. So there you go. There's a little bit of vulnerability from me. All right, guys. On the show today, we've got Dylan Slattery. Man, Dylan's an awesome guy. He caught my attention, with some of his articles, some of the things that he's done, just some of the talks that he's had. Really cool guy. Really glad we connected. And on today's show, we really dig deep into a lot of the health aspect. Dylan talks about mental health a lot. He lost his father to suicide. He had addiction issues. He was diagnosed with stage 4 melanoma. And man, had some tough times, gained a ton of weight. But Dylan's doing excellent right now. He's lost all his weight. He's back in shape. He's speaking a lot pre-COVID. And he's doing a great job motivating a lot of people out there, including myself. So I'm happy to welcome you guys to my conversation with Mr. Dylan Slattery. All right, guys, welcome to the show. We've got Mr. Dylan Slattery on with us tonight, coming from Denver, Colorado. Dylan, how's it going, brother?
Doing well, man. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, awesome. Good chatting with you. Dylan and I are connected in a lot of different ways, and I'm so glad we finally worked it out through all the kinks to try to get this interview set up.
I know. We've been working on this for a few months now. It's crazy.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'm excited to talk to you, man. I really dug into your story. We have a similar story and a kind of similar background on a couple different things. But why don't you start off by telling everyone just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I live in Denver now. I grew up in Northeast Iowa, so I'm a huge baseball fan, as you can see, and met a lot of these guys at the Field of Dreams, which is where my hometown is in Dyersville, Iowa. So I grew up playing a lot of baseball. Family was super important to me. So I'm the oldest of 4 boys. My mom is the youngest of 12. And so I'm one of 41 grandkids on my mom's side. So grew up with a lot of family, a lot of friends, and competing a lot. Grew up in Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout. And so growing up, I did all the things. I checked all the boxes, did a lot of things well. And all of a sudden in my early 20s, started to face adversity for the first time. And as you know, a lot of that had to do with cancer. So.
Yeah, you got an incredible story, man. It's not just your cancer journey. It's kind of like, there's a lot of aspects in your life that really have led up to where you're at now, and I guess where you are now from like an emotional and mental health standpoint and stuff like that. So we're going to dig into that stuff. It's going to be a great interview. I can already tell. We just by watching, I was watching your one of your YouTube videos recently. I can't think of the name of it. It has something to do with like Descents. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, First Descents. So they're a nonprofit organization actually out of Denver here. And they help young adult cancer survivors, so 18 to 39, help overcome the three main things that we all experience as young adult cancer survivors are depression, anxiety, and isolation. And so they help unite people, make them feel not so much an anomaly, because as you know, being a young adult with cancer, a lot of our friends and family are getting promoted, starting families, buying houses, things of that nature. And here we are just trying to survive one more day. So by bringing people together and creating that community, we can find a lot of strength and unity in that. So very similar to what we're experiencing with COVID. As much as it wants to bring us apart, I think it's united us in more ways than anything.
Absolutely. I feel like any kind of adversity brings opportunity. And, this has given us all of opportunity to kind of reset. I know for me, like personally, like being a business owner, it's like a 24-hour-a-day job. And all this has really like reset me in a way. And it helps you really dictate your priorities in a lot of ways. And I love, like, just in our community here in Atlanta, I see people walking up and down the street with their families. Like, you never saw that. Everybody's like hurrying to get somewhere around here. Yep. And there's so much like family time and everything. So I'm really happy to see that. I feel like a lot of relationships will get maybe restored or kind of like, I don't know, put back together a little bit during this time. Sometimes being forced to spend time with people helps you work out the kinks that you may have. But yeah, I'm really, really interested to see how this kind of takes part. So I know the isolation thing is always a tough thing as well too. Even the people that felt alone, going through times like this, they're out there feeling even more alone, and, so I think it's a good message to really reach out to people, let them know that, feelings change, and you may feel it one way one day and then a different way the other. And so that's an important reminder that feelings do change, and, no one is technically alone. Everybody that's under our voice, as we talk tonight, it's one of those things where people just have an opportunity to grow together, to come together, to really embrace each other through the best and the worst times. And that's what, that's one of the best things about being a human being is, man, we're all in this thing together. So, well, yeah, like your story, man. So tell us, I know you were diagnosed with melanoma first, correct? You had like a lump in your neck. Was that what it was?
Yes. So I had a mole on my neck when I was 22. So right after my 22nd birthday, my mom had been after me about getting this mole checked for a while, and being the stubborn early 20s male that I was, my mom didn't know anything about anything. And so I just kept putting it off. And finally she just scheduled the appointment and was like, here's where you need to be and when, show up. So I showed up, and with one goal in mind, proving my mom wrong and telling her that it was just a mole. But, I'm going to put a plug in here for Melanoma Awareness Month, May. And if you have any moles that look abnormal, and so they always talk about like the ABCDs of skincare. And so if it doesn't look consistent in the border, asymmetrical, so if it's not like a perfect circle and has jagged edges, color, if the color is inconsistent and has different colors in different areas, or the depth is starting to change and it's evolving, those are the ABCDs of melanoma. And so I that my mole fit all of those. So first it started off round and brown, and then there was like this part that started to kind of grow around it. In terms of the border, obviously it was inconsistent color. Both of those were different colors, and it almost looked like a scab. So when I would pick it, it would bleed. And that was like the thing that set my mom off, was moles don't bleed. And like I said, it was starting to change and had been changing. So went and got it checked out, got the results back when I was in class, and ignored the call, which was kind of how I dealt with things at that point. It was like, I didn't want to deal with it, just pretended that it wasn't happening. And when I listened to the voicemail, they had already scheduled my surgery for up in Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. So went up the following week, and they cut me open. So I have a 7-inch scar that runs from the top of my ear to the middle of my neck. And they were concerned that the depth of it was to a point where at that point it was right at the fringe. Now it would be way past, because they've gotten more conservative with those measures. And so that's why they cut me open, to make sure that, you know, my lymph nodes and things in that area hadn't been affected. All the tests and the margins came back clear. So they told me, go back to life as normal. So I did. But some things were happening in my life where, although I was doing really well in school, you know, I had a 3.8, I was double majoring in econ, and I was either going to go into business or be a teacher and a coach. And so, but it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like what I was supposed to be doing. It felt like I was doing it because that's what other people told me I was going to be good at. And so I never really questioned it. And then when I started to question things, I started to feel some tension inside. And so that's kind of a recurring theme in my story. And so that happened in April. And then over the next 18 months, it was just this whirlwind of adventure. So later that year, I was home over Christmas break, and we were out celebrating a friend's birthday. And it was an icy night in Iowa. This ice storm rolled through, and on our way home, we crossed the center line, hit the ditch in this truck. There were 6 of us in it. And we went up into this field, and then actually hit this like embankment, which caused the truck to roll up to 6 times. It snowed the next day, so we don't really have all the details. But when the truck came to a halt, my high school classmate, a friend of mine, was pinned underneath of it. And so I pulled her out from underneath of it and started to do CPR on her until I knew she was no longer with us. And so that really affected me in a lot of ways. And so, as I mentioned, I was already starting to run from a lot of these questions and starting to feel some internal conflict going on. And things only got worse because I avoided them. I turned to things like alcohol, drugs, and even food, you know, overeating, trying to do anything I could to feel good in the moment and mask the reality that was. And so things kind of came to a halt that March. So about a year after my initial surgery and diagnosis, it was actually the anniversary of my father taking his own life. My mom got a message from one of my friends concerned that I was either going to hurt myself or take my own life. I made some comments about just feeling hopeless and lacking direction and purpose. And so they called her, and I woke up on the anniversary of my dad committing suicide to my mom shaking me awake, asking me if I was okay. And, you know, I'd made those comments under the influence, and I didn't even know what she was talking about. And so that's where I had to have this conversation where, although I was doing well in school, I hadn't been to class in months because to me, life didn't make a whole lot of sense at that time. I had a lot of PTSD-like symptoms where I was angry, asking the question why, and why didn't he just take me instead of Brittany in the car accident? Because, you know, she was such a joy and a light to the world. And here I was just wishing that life would be over, quite frankly. And so that was a real wake-up call, not only for me, but my mom. She didn't really know that a lot of these things were going on. And luckily, as I mentioned before this, I've always surrounded myself with really good people and had a lot of really good friends around me that have held me to a higher standard. And so luckily they had the courage to make that call. because they knew that my mom would be able to get through to me at a time when I needed it most. So chose to leave school. Luckily, I had done well enough where I could graduate. I had enough credits to do that. And so I went home and did what I knew how to do best at that point, and that was coach baseball and win baseball games. So I did that for the summer, and then woke up in the fall to go to an Iowa football game, and I had this golf ball sized lump that showed up in the like 5 hours that I slept that night before the game. And so it just popped up overnight. It was on the same side of my face as that scar was, and I knew it was back. But again, for that day and for the football game, I just acted like nothing was wrong. Wasn't sure what was going on, but I knew it was back. I just didn't know how bad it was. And so that next week up at Mayo Clinic was one of the worst weeks of my life. I went through a lot of different tests, and it was just like every time they ran another test, they found the cancer somewhere else. So it was still melanoma. That's a common misconception, is that melanoma can't go past the skin, but it's actually one of the most aggressive forms of cancer out there. Once it gets past that subcutaneous level of the skin, it goes right for the organs. So the liver, lung, and then to the brain. So Jimmy Carter, former president, he actually had melanoma in his brain, and that's where it likes to go. And they told me at that point, the only good news they had for me was that it wasn't in my brain. So not exactly what you want to hear as a 23-year-old.
Yeah. So first diagnosis, a couple of years before that, then all of a sudden it comes back. Everyone that I've spoken to about cancer always said the time it comes back is always worse. They felt worse. The first time it catches you by surprise, right? You can't believe it. You don't know what's going on. And then the second time it's like, wait a minute, I'm going to have to go through all this stuff again. I know they just cut yours out and stuff like that before, but like, it's almost like, it's like when you think you've accomplished something, then you just get reminded real quick that you hadn't. And then this is obviously a life-threatening condition. So now you have stage 4, melanoma. And
Yep.
I know the prognosis is like 15% for that?
Yeah, so even still today, the 5-year survival rate for stage 4 melanoma is less than 15%. Yep.
So you're given a 15% chance to survive. Your mother, I had a brother, my younger brother took his life several years ago. And so I saw my mom go through that scenario as well too, as like all of us did. And whenever I was going through cancer, I one of my main goals, I'm not sure if you felt this way too, was I don't want my mom to lose someone else. That's I'm not saying I'm a mama's boy or anything like that, but
I'll admit it, I am.
Yeah. I mean, she's your hero, you know what I mean? Like she's everything. And so that was one of my motivating factors. How did she take the news when you found out that you had stage 4?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And, something that I didn't share was when I was 19, a high school classmate and friend of mine was diagnosed with melanoma. So he actually missed 3 days of class at college. And, he's a tough kid. I played football with him, wrestled with him in high school, and he's not a Sally by any stretch of the imagination. So for him to just miss 3 days of class because he couldn't get out of bed and it hurt, it hurt. And so he had these stomach cramp type things going on. And finally his friends were like, dude, you either need to go to the hospital or go to class. And so he went to the hospital, and he was full of melanoma. He had one mole on the top of his head, and he was dead 3 weeks later. So my mom, I don't know if it was a good idea or a bad idea, actually reached out to his mom after I was diagnosed. And it was weird. When she came home, it was like I was already dead. And it's interesting because for me, cancer gave me something to fight for at a time when I felt like life wasn't worth fighting for. And I dropped the hammer. Like I'm a competitive person. And so when you stack the cards against me, I rise up, I'm not folding. And so I had a very stern conversation with her, and she'll tell you the same thing. It's like, no, listen here, this is how it's going to be. They gave me less than 15% chance. I only need 1% chance, right in line with the podcast is I only need 1% chance to have a chance. And so, one of the things that I like to talk about is, so oftentimes people talk about, are you a glass half full or glass half empty kind of person? But what if the glass is only 15% full? What are you going to choose to look at? And so, where I used to be a people pleaser and a pessimist, now I'm like the ultimate, I'm very good now at drawing boundaries, setting expectations. Like, if you're going to be in my circle, this is what I expect. But also, I'm an eternal optimist now. And actually, I don't know if you've experienced this in some of the cancer circles, but I've been accused of toxic positivity, if there is such a thing.
Yeah. So you said your mom responded like you were already gone, but you guys had a conversation like you were going to fight and move forward. So what was your track like? What were your options then when you had to move forward? You have tumors in several different locations. Like what were your options given to you?
Yeah, so I had tumors in my liver, lung, neck, and then 3 tumors in my spine. And so it was in too many different areas that they couldn't do surgery to remove them. And it's interesting because I was still going to Mayo Clinic at this point, where I had the surgery 18 months before, and they presented the same options, but the tone, and it was a lot of like running me in circles because I had tumors in so many different areas. Like some of their staff weren't comfortable answering questions about this or that because it was outside of their area of expertise. And I really felt like I wasn't treated as a person. I was seen as like a problem or a nuisance in a lot of ways, where I didn't fit in a box, and so I just didn't belong. And so we went and got a second opinion at the University of Iowa, and was actually presented the same treatment options. In terms of what they recommended, it was the same from at the top at least. And so instead of saying, this is your only option, it's probably not going to work, they said, this is your best option, and we're going to run with it. And so just having that conviction and belief from my team, that's my team now, right? Is the people that were trying to keep me alive. And just by having that conviction and that belief behind what they were doing, even though it was the exact same treatment being administered at the other place, it just felt right. And there was a lot more conviction and things behind that. And to me, that made all the difference.
Yeah. Awesome. When you started did they give you chemo, or how do they treat melanoma at that point when you have so many different tumors?
Yeah. So there wasn't any FDA options available at that time, as far as I'm aware. So what they presented to me was a lot of different experimental things. And so I spent, it was the fall of 2015, I believe, no, 2014. And so in the fall, it was a 2-part trial study where what they were looking at was which would work better to do first or second. And so it was all random, but I had 4 treatments every 3 weeks. So it was just 4 treatments in the fall, spread out every 3 weeks. And then the second half of that was right after New Year's. And that was much more intense. So I almost got this false sense of what cancer was like because I just go down. I was an outpatient. So I'd go down, do some blood work. It took about an hour and a half to administer. And I was just a little bit tired, maybe a little bit runny in the afternoon that day, but that was it. And so fatigue and a little bit of diarrhea was the only thing that I really experienced from that. And then after New Year's was the high dose IL-2 is what they call it. And I was in the ICU for 4 weeks for that. So they administered it every 8 hours. Mm-hmm. So 8 a.m., 4 p.m., and then midnight every day for as many as I could take over the course of 4 weeks. So I would do a week in, a week out to recover, a week in. Then I think I had 3 weeks off because they were measuring everything because it was a trial. And so I had a scan in between where they were measuring progress, and then another week in, week out, and then the 4th week.
So how long were you going through treatment before something started working for you?
So we, in that 3-week period off, we could see that progress was being made. Tumors were starting to shrink. And actually, that was like one of the hardest periods of my life, was those 4 weeks in ICU. It, it was like going to hell. There was no time to sleep and recover. So it was like 6 a.m. I'd do blood work. 8 a.m. I'd get my first treatment, and then it was like clockwork, same symptoms in the same time frame every single time. And so how they explained immunotherapy to me was like downloading an update on your computer. So on the surface, it probably didn't look that much different than traditional chemo in a lot of ways in terms of, sickness and things like that. So about an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes after the first treatment was administered, and it was like clockwork every time, I would start to have these full body shakes. So it almost looked like I was having a seizure or extreme shivering. So they would put a heating pad between my legs. They would mummy wrap me with like 7 blankets over the top, and I would just lay there and shake. And for the first few times, they tried to give me Demerol, which is a muscle relaxer, but I was highly, highly reactive to that. So I actually had a PICC line in my arm, and I could watch the fluids meet each other when they put it in my line. And as soon as those two fluids would meet each other, my head would go in the trash. Like, I was that reactive to it. And so I wasn't eating. I lost like 35 pounds over a month and a half while I was there. And I wasn't eating. So when you don't have anything to throw up and you're just, dry heaving.
It's the worst.
Awful.
I'd rather throw up than behave.
Well, yeah. So that's why I told him, like, I don't want any more Demerol. I'll just lay here and shake. And so I would do that for about an hour and a half, where I felt so cold. I felt like I was shivering to try and warm up. And on a dime, it would just flip. At about an hour and a half of shaking, I would go from feeling super cold to super hot, and I couldn't take enough clothes off. And then I would have a fever of like 104, 105, and, strip all the way down to my shorts trying to, and so that whole process played out. The fever would last for about another hour and a half to 2 hours. And so not a huge gap there before next round of blood work, and then followed by the next round of treatment, etc. So, it just drained me. And the reason why I had to be in the ICU is because, through that reset process, to finish the analogy, is when you download a update on your computer, you still have to reboot it. And so that was like my body rebooting every time. And so it still takes you down and then builds you back up and tries to retrain your immune system to recognize the melanoma as melanoma. And so, it took me down a few times to where my organs started to shut down. And one night, I actually woke up to 6 or 8 doctors around my bed. One was watching the monitor because I was getting close to flatlining, and they had the paddles right there ready to use them on me. But luckily, I bounced back up, and we were able to keep pushing forward.
Wow. So how long were your treatments again total?
So that lasted over the course of like between the fall and the spring. It was like 3 or 4 months. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I finished in March.
So when you started did you all of a sudden have one scan that showed all the cancer was gone, or was it slowly progressingly?
Well, so in that middle period where they did a scan, they could see that it was trending positively, which excited them again, because this was all trial. They had really no idea. And so it was trending in the right direction. And then in the spring of 2015, when I finished the experimental treatments, we thought we had it. The initial report came back like, this is a miracle. There's nothing here. And then a day or two later, we had already made the announcement, like told people I was moving out to Colorado. So I actually moved out here in 2015. And a day or two later came back, they called and said that the advanced pathology report showed that there were still 2 small tumors in my liver. and me still being stubborn, I was like, screw it, I'm going to Colorado. So I moved out here, and the first scan showed after 2 months of being out here that my tumors in my liver were starting to grow again. And they gave me the option to start treatments out here, but just felt like the timing wasn't right. So I moved back home where I had that solid foundation of family and friends and support, and continued to do treatments. So by this time, the fall of 2015, they had an FDA option out there. So it's called Keytruda, and it's actually the same immunotherapy that Jimmy Carter used, and it took the cancer out of his brain. So where, just a few years before that, they said, if it gets to your brain, we might as well write you off. Now we're seeing, these success stories where it doesn't matter where it's at, they can reverse it.
Wow. Yeah. It's crazy how, again, your misfortune, people are trying drugs out on you, and I'm sure you're like, give me whatever you got so I can get through this and get on the other side of this. Starts working. And it's a miracle. It's amazing, man. I know trial therapies can get people's hopes up sometimes. And, cause you never know, it's a percentage on it'll work or it won't work, but at least it gives you some hope while you're taking it. It's going to be doing something positive for you. So I love to hear that came about. That's lung cancer is like that as well too. There's certain types of lung cancer where they have immunotherapy drugs that are really making a huge difference in survivorship in lung cancer.
Keytruda is actually advertised on TV as a lung cancer treatment. So that's probably one of them.
Yeah. And I've talked to a lot of lung cancer patients and survivors, and man, it just gives them a whole new perspective on life once they start getting on stuff like that, which is awesome. Well, great,
Yeah,
man.
the thing when you're on one of those trial studies is they always have to ask your permission to like collect and use your data. And so to me, it was like never even a question. Why would I not contribute the data in the hope that it helps them find a cure or a solution down the road that's less painful than what I had to endure. So, and that's exactly how it played out, right? Like the experimental treatment that I used was the bridge to what they're using now and what I ended up using later. So
one of the things I talk about when I talk about like cancer and everything with people is when treatment's over, it doesn't mean cancer's over. That's one of those things, if you're making a list of things that, every cancer patient should know, that's definitely on the list. You're not just healed, wash your hands, it's all done, go back on with life like it was before. There's a adjustment period, and it can be longer depending on how your situation was, all the things you kind of experienced as you went through that. That first month or two, whenever I finished all of my treatment, I didn't realize how, you focus on your physical health so much. Like, give me the medication. I'm in the hospital. I'm meeting with my doctors. We're doing scans. Like, you're really focusing on the tumor side, right? Or whatever ailment you're treating. But sometimes, and I think it's probably even more prevalent in men, is we're neglecting the mental health side of everything. And then all of a sudden you're done. Now it's like, well, I don't have to worry about this at the moment. But for me, like in the first month or two, I couldn't like laugh, or it was weird. Like I was in this traumatic stage, like mentally, like where I was just like, life wasn't as fun as it was. Did you ever experience anything like that?
I think it happened a little bit earlier for me. So like when I was initially diagnosed at 22, I did not want to be a 22-year-old with cancer at all. So like people would come up and ask about my scar. I'd have people come up, behind me and say, "Hey, did you know your neck's bleeding?" They're just trying to look out for me, but it wasn't bleeding. It was just the scar looked a lot worse than it does today. But I wanted nothing to do with being a 22-year-old with cancer. And I just avoid it. Very much so. I didn't want to talk about it, didn't want anything to do with it. And then, the car accident happened, and then the cancer came back, and I tried to maintain as much normalcy as possible. So like I said, I still coached throughout. And it was almost like it was detrimental in the other direction where, I caught wind of people saying things like, because I never lost all my hair, he didn't lose all his hair, so it can't be that bad. Or, he's here watching this basketball game. Shouldn't he be at home resting? Or if it's really that bad, kind of a tone. And it's like, I literally almost died last week. You have no idea. But what gives me energy is watching the guys that I've poured myself into on the baseball field, watching them compete in basketball or wrestling. Like, I still want that fix, and they drive me. And so understanding, I think that's what's most important throughout all this is, again, I was a people pleaser before the cancer. And so it's like, well, if I can't even fit in your box as a cancer patient because I didn't lose my hair, or, I'm not whatever your expectations are for me, why try to please people in any way? Like, do you get really clear on what you want to be, who you want to become, and go do that, because you're never going to please anyone anyway. And so when it came back the next time, the thing that changed most for me is actually we were in pods in the ICU, and a woman was there for a completely different reason. I have no idea what her condition was, but she actually passed away. And it was a night where it was late at night, really late, and it was real quiet on the floor. And I could tell there was a lot of like rustling and energy changing in the other room. And her family and friends kind of gathered, and you could tell that the end was near. And then she actually passed away. And so I got to hear her family and friends start to share, they'd laugh and then they'd cry and everything in between. And so I really started to ask myself, what would my family and friends, but most of all, what would my 3 younger brothers remember me as? And, how I had turned to alcohol and drugs and the distractions that life has to offer. I wasn't really happy with how I believed they would remember me. And so that was the turning point for me and it happened in the mind first. And then I started to act on it a little bit later. But, I started to envision a life after cancer, because I just wanted to earn one more chapter to write the ending of the story that I wanted. And so I started to dream big. And, one of my mentors on the baseball field, he told me, someday you're going to look back on this and you're going to be able to share your story like he had. He was a motivational speaker too. And he said, someday you're going to share this story and it's going to inspire thousands. And so just being able to have that, pie in the sky sort of image to aim at. And so then I started to think, because I had a lot of time to think in that hospital bed, what would that look like? And, the picture just started to come together in my mind. And when you can see something and you start to believe it, there's power in that. And so you asked earlier, like, did things started to trend in the right direction? And with this immunotherapy that I got put on, the FDA approved one, things continued to trend in the right direction. And so I felt like we had turned the corner. It hadn't disappeared yet, but I circled the date, I circled the month of January of the following year, because I figured, if we continued on this path, and then I needed 6 months before they would allow me to be off of the treatments, that it would maybe look like January of the following year, I could get taken off of the treatments, because at that point, it was basically a forever for now approach. You're on this treatment forever with the information that we have now, because they weren't sure what was going to happen, because again, it was so new. What would happen if they took me off of it? Would it come right back? What did that look like? So it was January 19th, 2017. I got the report that we had made it to 6 months with no evidence of disease, and they told me I was good. So they took me off of the treatments, and that was kind of like my line in the sand. And so for me, what I always tell people is that so often what I hear is, I just want things to go back to normal. And that is an expectation where you're setting yourself up for failure 100%, because you'll never go back to normal. What I tell people is, pick up the pen, create your new normal, write the narrative, create the boundaries necessary in your life to be able to create the normal that you desire. It'll never go back to the way it was. We just have to get past that. But when we can be courageous enough to dictate what we want our normal to be and do everything that we can to make that a reality, that's when we can start to, create the life that we want.
I think a lot of people, when they say they want life to get back to normal, is because that's the best they thought it could be. Mm-hmm. Not knowing that there's so much in the future that could be even better. And I think that that's almost like a limiting belief. Lots of times we think back about the happy moments that we had, and now it's like, oh, I got cancer now and life's never going to be the same. I'm going to do all this. But some of the happiest and most successful people I've ever met are on the opposite side of cancer,
Yeah,
and
100%.
Yeah. Like the motivation, and, you don't have to have cancer or a traumatic event to get motivated. But I think especially when you're a younger adult, when you've had to think about death a lot sooner than you thought you were going to, it really puts things into perspective. My mom says to me all the time, she's like, you know what, you don't have to be old to die. Like you can die when you're younger. She's like, so why waste a second, because our days are, numbered, and they're, people make it, people don't make it. You don't know if you're which part of the, which day is yours, I would say, when it comes to that. But, you can live every day. And instead of, I think sometimes, for me, like as like an entrepreneur and stuff, like you're always like looking for the next, like you're always like living in the future versus living in the present sometimes, because you're wanting
100%.
You're wanting that goal, and you got this marked off, and you got all these things you're trying to accomplish. And like, sometimes I'm like, wait a minute, like you like bring yourself back into really the present right now and enjoy what you have. And, gratitude's always in the present. It's not in the future or anything like that. So it's like, you start listing all the things that you're thankful for, you're grateful for here and here. And then like, okay, wait, I can enjoy where I'm at right now and still pursue all these dreams and goals and stuff I have in the future. And I think that takes some time to kind of develop that mental muscle in a way. Because, I've seen a lot of people who have a cancer story and it becomes the only chapter in their book, like it becomes their life, or some kind of illness or traumatic event that it consumes their whole life. And, not knocking anybody that does this, but people get tired of hearing that, people don't want to hear like you just sitting in it sometimes, they want to hear like you actually pushing forward, because that's what gives other people hope. That's what pulls people out of those pits of despair and depression and anxiety and all the things that we experience whenever we're, alone with ourselves, and then those types of feelings and stuff. So go ahead.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that it's a muscle, and as a cancer patient, I feel like that muscle is conditioned so much to be, all we hear is like, we can't do this, you won't be able to do that, you may or may not be able to eat this, whatever the case may be. And so it's conditioning it in the other direction and conditioning those limited beliefs. And then it's like, what if you told that person, like, you can be more than the story that you're currently living or that you've lived in the past, whether it's domestic violence, growing up on the streets, or whatever the case may be. Is like, what if I just gave you permission to be more than that? What could life look like? And so I recently shared the story of JFK when they were trying to get to the moon. It's like, every scientist that he went to, when he brought that idea to him, they said it's not possible. But he reframed the question, and he's like, if it were, what would it have to look like? And he'd get a little tidbit from this guy and a little tidbit of this from this guy. And soon he started to see the pieces fit together, and they started to see the pieces fit together. And then it became possible. And so it's like, if you're having trouble saying it's not possible, ask yourself, well, what if it were? Mm-hmm. And you don't have to see the whole picture. That's where I think people get hung up with, is like, what would it take to be a motivational speaker, or whatever the case is. Like, that's so far away, but just take the step that's in front of you. And because once we start to take that step, and then the next step, we get a little bit different vision. We have a little bit more experience, more knowledge, whatever the case may be, maybe another mentor that's a little bit further down the road. And then we can start to see those pieces come together. But we don't get there unless we take the step that's in front of us.
Absolutely. So your life's obviously a lot different now than it was several years ago. You've got a new perspective on life. I know you do a lot of speaking and stuff now. Um, Perspective is, some of the videos I've seen of you, like, I think that's what you coach on a lot, right? Like it's all about your perspective on whether you're speaking to a basketball team or a large group of cancer survivors or whoever. It's, you're walking them through your journey, and, it's a perspective and a culture, different things like that you're really coaching people on, encouraging people to really kind of reset and think on lots of times. One question I ask a lot of people that come on the show is, what's the best thing that cancer's done for you? It's a kind of a weird question, but I think, how you spin it is really, when you look at it from a different way, it can be a very, very positive answer.
Yeah, for sure. I think the way I feel is I'm playing with house money, because to your point earlier, we've seen death, and we've seen it real close to us. And I've seen it around me, through my other experiences, how death can show up on any given day. And so when you take that approach of like playing with house money, every day is a gift. And for me, I've started to turn that story on its head. And instead of saying, the fact that my dad took his own life before I was born is a curse, the fact that I was involved in a fatal car accident is a curse, the fact that I was diagnosed with cancer is a curse. What if we turn that story on its head and said all of those things were a gift? Now all of a sudden, my number one goal in life is to be the best father and husband I can be. Hasn't happened yet, but it's a goal of mine. I've used the story of, the car accident to, talk about things like alcohol and driving, or, just the perspective of the shortness of life. I mean, we all need that reminder some days. And then cancer, just being able to see that as a gift. And ultimately, the conclusion that I've come to is that adversity is a gift, and it's something that unites all of us. And not only can it unite us, we've seen what COVID has done. We're all experiencing that. And we've all experienced cancer to some degree, whether it's ourselves or a loved one. And so I think that it's something that really brings us together. And then just being able to see that as a gift, and allowing it to transform us into the people, the teams, the organizations that we're meant to become.
Absolutely, man. I love what you're doing. I love the way you're sharing your story. It takes a lot of vulnerability to get up in front of a bunch of people, encouraged to share your story. But, I'm sure there's a passion, fire, desire inside of you that you can never do it enough. There's a countless amount of people who need to hear the story. Your life may be great right now, but there's someone out there whose life's terrible, and they may be in a different situation. So your story being out there to people, you're just documenting your journey, the way you're doing everything, I think is really wonderful. I think, people are going to get a lot out of this. This happens to me a little bit sometimes, but there's so many people out there that hear your story that you never know, and they don't, click like or comment or whatever else and stuff like that. But, I think it's one of those reminders, like every time, a lot of people don't realize it takes a ton of energy to get up and talk in front of a bunch of people. Like when you're done, it's so exhausting. Like it's like you just, ran like a half marathon or had like a crazy workout session or something. Like it's really draining. Like a 30-minute, 45-minute talk wipes you out for like a couple. I just want to go home and nap. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy, but you're giving yourself away, and it takes a lot of energy from people. And so I think anybody that does that is really, it says a lot about who they are and how you're just giving, a little piece of you out to so many different people. So I think it's amazing. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach out and, listen to your story or connect with you about speaking engagements?
Yeah, you can. I always say this is definitely a calling that I'm working on turning into a career. It's definitely not something that I chose. It's chosen me, and I feel a ton of motivation around my dad, my baseball coach. I lost to cancer as well, and just trying to use this story as a gift to others. And so I can be reached at Stage 4 to On Stage is kind of my persona that I've taken on. So I've lived stage 4 in a lot of ways, whether it was the alcohol, the drugs, the car accident. We all have those stage 4 moments in life, but ultimately where we want to get to is that next stage in life. And so that's what I'm trying to help other people get to. And so that's where you can find me, is on Instagram, Facebook, Stage 4 to On Stage, or you can just look me up as Dylan Slattery. You'll find me that way as well. So again, I have the podcast, have a website. You can find me on social media. Feel free to message me about anything. I get a lot of people reaching out, and it's crazy. I don't know if you've experienced this, but I honestly probably get introduced to a survivor or someone that's been newly diagnosed. It seems like every other week, which is really sad. But again, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to connect. And what I've learned, and you've probably shared this experience too, is that life is all about relationships. It's not the what that we do, it's who we get to share those moments with. And, whether it was your mom or my mom, who spent all 4 weeks with me in the ICU sleeping. I don't know if you've seen the picture on Instagram, but it's like a windowsill with a couch cushion on it. Yeah, she was willing to sleep on that for 4 weeks with me. And so that's where I realized, like, she was the person that I tried to please all the time growing up. And what I discovered when I had cancer, where I was a 23-year-old baby. I had to be helped to the bathroom and the smallest of tasks. And she was there with me the whole way. So then it was like, well, she's happy with me in these moments, like, she'll be happy with me as long as I'm happy. And so I feel like there's so many of us that are probably listening to this, where whether it's a parent or someone that we love, that we feel like we need to please, at the end of the day, all they want is for us to be happy. And so if we can again take that pen back and start to write our own story, you're going to have a lot happier ending.
Awesome, man. Well, be sure to check out Dylan Slattery at Stage 4 to On Stage. I'm sure he'll be a great speaker for your next event. Got an amazing story, and be sure to check out his podcast as well. Dylan, thanks for being on the show tonight, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Truett. It's been a pleasure.
We appreciate you spending time with us on today's episode and encourage you to continue the conversation to help you keep pushing forward. For more resources based on today's episode, as well as ways to recommend a guest and connect to Truett personally, head over to 1%podcast.com. Be sure to join us next time for more stories of inspiration right here with Truett Taylor on the 1% Podcast.